Hi everybody. So I'm gonna read 10 medieval weapons that changed the course of the Middle Ages. I really like medieval history, and I feel like some people would probably like medieval history as well. So I'm gonna read these before I go to bed in hopes that if you are trying to sleep or you just are trying to relax, that maybe this can help a little bit. So, medieval weapons. It says, step into a medieval battlefield. Knights clash with lances, archers darken the sky with arrows, and trebuchets hurl stones at castle walls. These were more than tools of war. They shaped kingdoms, toppled fortresses, and changed the balance of power across Europe and beyond. Here are the 10 medieval weapons that defined an era and transformed the course of the Middle Ages. Number 1. Swords, the icon of chivalry and warfare. No weapon is more associated with the Middle Ages than the sword. It was used throughout the medieval world, as Sue Burning explains, was more than just a weapon. Every culture that has had and used swords has viewed them as extraordinary objects. They feature predominantly in the history, cosmology, and mythology of communities across the globe, from Africa to Northern Europe, from East Asia to the Indian subcontinent. Their appeal is not solely attributable to humanity's timeless fascination with death. This is clear from the spectrum of meanings attached to swords across time and space, encompassing power, wisdom, joy, protection, and fear. If you ever are thinking of the Middle Ages, probably the one weapon you're gonna think of is the sword. It's the one you see in many movies, many duels of the sword, the knights with the armor and the sword. But let's continue reading here. For most of the Middle Ages, the sword was widely used among elite and common soldiers, with some variation between the size of its blade and how its hilt and pommel were fashioned. Around the 13th century, we can see a change in the sword, where its blades begin to get narrower and sharpened at its point. This was because armor was becoming tougher, and the slashing style of the sword was no longer effective. It now had to be used more as a thrusting weapon, but even with these changes, the sword would gradually decline as a part of vital medieval equipment. The sword place is first on our list of the most important weapons in the Middle Ages, not just because it was so widely used in this period, but because so many medieval cultures viewed it as a symbol of military strength and power. Number 2. Firearms, the dawn of gunpowder and the end of knights. You can see some of these people with the armor and then firearms. This man looks like he's wearing a skirt. I'm sure if this is here, it would be accurate. It says that this is from the British Library of Burney, and I guess created in 169, and they got skirts on. They have armor skirts on, which is pretty interesting. I love they have color. Apparently the medieval times was just filled with color. If you could afford it, you had color. I mean, makes sense, really. Nothing else really to draw you like technology out of the world. So if you are going to be really in reality, having a color around you probably is needed to keep sane. The weapon that would first transform the medieval world into the early modern one was the gun. Handguns and buses wielded by individuals and the larger artillery pieces like cannons that could strike at fortifications. The invention of gunpowder in China in the early 9th century would trigger a series of new weapons. Gradually, these developments and innovations spread from Eastern Asia and fundamentally changed how war was waged. The rise of gunpowder weapons was often been talked about as a military revolution, although from our perspective it was a slow-moving one, taking generations. Introduced into Europe in the early 14th century, even by the end of the 15th century, these weapons could prove to be slow and difficult to wield effectively. The military commanders understood that this technology would be the dominant weapon on the battlefield, and every kingdom, state, or principality was spending money and resources to build up their supplies. The states that were able to do so effectively would emerge in the 15th and 16th centuries as the key powers in Europe and Asia. I guess that could lead to colonialism, and the states that had the money to buy these would be like your Spains, your Portugals, Britons. Now, bows, the precursor here to guns, the long-distance weapons, the weapons that won empires. This man looks very kind of like Bring It On, almost. He looks disgusted and disappointed. Few weapons in the Middle Ages inspired as much poetry and fear as the bow. To medieval writers, it was more than wood and string. It was a living thing that bent, breathed, and struck from afar. An old English riddle captured this deadly elegance. A gob's my name, if you work it out. I'm a fair creature fashioned for battle. When I bend and shoot a deadly shaft from my stomach, I desire only to send that poison as far away as possible. When my lord, who devised this torment for me, releases my limbs, I become longer, and bend upon my slaughter. Spit out that deadly poison I swallowed before. No man's party parted easily from the object. I describe if he's stuck by what flies from my stomach, he pays for its poison with his strength. Speedy atonement for life. I'll serve no master when unstrung, only when I'm cunningly notched. Now guess my name. I think if you were to know this is a weapon in the poem, I think it would actually be pretty easy to get. But combine a flexible staff of wood with a strong string and you have one of the most well-known weapons of the Middle Ages. There were many variations of bows, and their effectiveness varied significantly depending on where and how they were used. Archers were usually found on battles or sieges throughout the medieval world, but they become a dominant force under the right circumstances. The Mongols were able to conquer much of Europe and Asia through the use of horse archers, who combined a stronger type of bow with the greater mobility of their cavalry. The English would also rely on their longbowmen to win several important battles during the 100 Years' War. As Jim Bradbury writes, there was no military situation in which the bow could not prove useful. One of the most famous battles was Henry VIII's battle against France, the Battle of Agincourt. There's a Netflix movie called The King that has Timothy Chalamet that plays Henry V. I think I said Henry VIII, but it's Henry V. Great movie. Not very historically accurate, but it gets you into the medieval mood. Spears and lances, the backbone of infantry and knights. Kelly DeBreeze and K. Smith noted that since the earliest times the spear, together with the swords, was the most important and widely used offensive weapon for both the infantry and cavalry. Essentially a long stick that ended with a blade, the spear could be held and thrust at opponents or thrown at them. When delivered from horseback, the weapon could be far more effective. This is how the idea of mounted shock combat developed, in which knights would couch the spear under their arms and use the speed of their horses to deliver a powerful blow. The spear of the knight evolved into the lance, and weapons we commonly associate with jousting and tournaments. Another lasting symbol of the Middle Ages, trebuchets, which are military siege weapons. In that movie I was talking about called The King, there's a great scene that's so peaceful where they just show a trebuchet going off at the night. It's a long siege on this castle in France, and they just show the trebuchets just constantly shooting these boulders at the castle day and night. It's so, I don't know, it's hard to explain. It's so peaceful. It's not because it's violent, but the way they shoot it is just so peaceful, and it really sticks out in the movie. But emerging in the 12th century, the trebuchet was the first important development in siege mechanics since ancient times. It marked a great improvement over weapons like the catapult, providing a more formidable way to attack castles and other fortifications. Jim Bradbury explains how it worked. A container for heavy materials was placed on one end of a whippy rope or pole, a sling to hold the stone on, or the other missile at the other end. The pole was on a pivot. The loaded end was winced down and released. The weight made the loaded end rise rapidly and eject its contents. The sling whipping over at the last minute gave added impetus. While today the trebuchet was more seen as an engineering challenge for college students or a fun way to throw pumpkins, in the Middle Ages it represented a new technology that forced military commanders to adapt their defenses, a process that would be further enhanced by gunpowder weapons. Number 6. Crossbows, leveling the field against knights. Terrible weapons. French were the crossbow nation. They had tons of, that was like their crossbow. The English had longbows. The French used a lot of crossbows. While this weapon existed since ancient times, it was strangely not mentioned very much in early medieval Europe. Then in the 20th century, the crossbow made a comeback, serving as a way for regular soldiers to fight back against better armed and equipped knights. Helen Nicholson describes the crossbow. It is not a quick weapon to use, because spanning the bow, drawing back the string, locking it back with the trigger, and placing the arrow or bolt in position ready to fire took much longer for the simple bow than the simple bow. But it could be used effectively by a comparative novice. It was much more powerful than a simple bow. In a single situation or where a large group of crossbow archers were operating on a battlefield, it could be devastating, for it could pierce chainmail. While the crossbow did get criticized as a dishonorable weapon, its use only grew in the later Middle Ages. By the 15th century, cities were hosting large-scale shooting tournaments. The crossbow will remain a much-used weapon, even during the coming age of guns. Greek fire, the Byzantine secret weapon. This is, I think, oil and fire, I think, if I remember correctly. The Byzantine Empire's most feared secret weapon, Greek fire, helped to secure several crucial native victories and helped Constantinople safe from siege. The exact formula remains unknown even today. Theories suggest ingredients such as sulfur-true, saltpetre, or quicklime, but its effects were unmistakably devastating. A thick, sticky liquid, it could be rejected through bronze tubes mounted on ships, much like a primitive flamethrower. Once ignited, it clung to sails and hulls, and most terrifyingly could not be extinguished by water, making enemy fleets especially vulnerable. A related incendiary Naphtha, based on petroleum, was used in the medieval Middle Eastern world. Like Greek fire, it gave its wielders a decisive advantage over foes who relied solely on steel, iron, and wooden ships. I did not know that naphtha was something they used, but yeah, the medieval flamethrower burned down your enemy's ships. If you get sticky fire on you, it's a pretty tough way to go. I'd think some of these medieval battles must have been horrifying. I mean, the death was on a lesser scale, obviously, but it was just so up close and personal, and some of the sieges were just terrifying. Number 8, pole arms. Pikes, halberds, and glaives that stopped cavalry. Halberds, pikes, and glaives, and many other regional variants all shared the same basic design. A long wooden shaft tipped with a blade or spike that could be both cut and thrust. These polearms began to dominate European battlefields around 1300, proving that disciplined infantry armed with these inexpensive weapons could stop even the most heavily armored knights. The secret to their success was not the weapon alone, but the way soldiers used it. Massed in tightly packed formations, presenting a wall of blades that was nearly impossible for charging cavalry to break. In skilled hands and in large numbers, polearms turned ordinary foot soldiers into a deadly defensive force, and sometimes an unstoppable offensive one. That's kind of reminded me of the phalanx with the Greeks. Anytime you put a wall of soldiers with spikes protruding out, it's extremely difficult to get by. Horses don't like it, and it's just a difficult wall to break. Number 9, axes. From Viking bearded axes to broad battle axes. This weapon is often linked to the early Middle Ages, but remained in use for centuries. People such as the Franks favored smaller axes as throwing weapons, while in Scandinavia, warriors wielded the large battle axe that has become iconic in our image of the Vikings. Jim Bradbury explains, the battle axe was popular with the Vikings and is often called a Norse or Danish axe. Vikings sometimes named their axes such as a witch or fiend, suggesting their personal nature. The Vikings used bearded axes, named from the shape of their drooping lower edge, and broad axes. The latter emerged circa 1000, sometimes with a steel edge wielded or welded to the blade. The blade was narrowest at the socket, broadening to a curved edge around a foot long. Yeah, that makes sense. I never heard of the bearded axe, but I guess that makes sense if you have like the goatee at the bottom of the axe there. The axe's simple design made it a versatile and deadly, effective for both cutting through shields and striking powerful blows in close combat. Yeah, just terrible ways to go, terrible fighting. Our last one is daggers. The final weapon of mercy and survival. I guess it's like if you ever played COD or Call of Duty, if you get shot down, you get the pistol. I guess in medieval times, if you get cut, you get the dagger out. Essentially a smaller version of the sword, one should not disregard it as an unimportant weapon of war. Ranging in size from 30 to 50 centimeters or 11 to 20 inches, it was a common instrument, both on the battlefield and in day-to-day use. Easy to carry and hide, daggers could be used with the minimum training. An attacker could wield its weapon to cut, stab, or throw, often in tight situations. By the 13th century, many versions of the dagger emerged in medieval Europe. Anslace, baselard, and stiletto, to name a few, that differed in how the blade was fashioned or how you gripped it. Meanwhile, the misericord got its name for being associated with the end of battles when the victorious soldiers had to decide what to do with their defeated opponents. Either offer them mercy and take them prisoner, or give them a mercy killing. From the humble dagger to the mighty trebuchet, these weapons reveal how innovation and adaptation shaped medieval battlefields, and even shifted the balance of power between kings, knights, and common soldiers. Many of them, like the sword and the longbow, still hold a powerful place in our imagination, symbols of both the ingenuity and the brutality that defined the Middle Ages.